My name is Dara. I am 36 years old, and I built my financial consulting firm from nothing but determination and sleepless nights. I never thought I would be sitting in a courtroom watching my husband of 2 years smugly demand half of everything I had worked for, including my beloved grandmother's estate. The confidence in his eyes, as he smirked at me from across the room, made my blood boil. But I remained calm, clutching the envelope I had prepared for exactly this moment. Before I reveal what happened in that courtroom, take a second to tell me where you are watching from, and subscribe if you want more real-life stories about justice being served. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Chicago, with parents who worked steady jobs but never had much extra. My dad was an accountant at a local firm, and my mom taught third grade at the elementary school 10 blocks from our house. We were comfortable but never wealthy. They taught me the value of hard work, but it was my grandmother Mary who truly shaped my understanding of financial independence. Grandma Mary was different from other women of her generation. Widowed at 40, she refused to remarry and instead built her own small business selling handmade jewelry. She managed to save enough to buy a beautiful beachfront cottage in Michigan that became our family sanctuary. Every summer I would spend weeks with her there watching the sunset over Lake Michigan as she shared her wisdom. Never put yourself in a position where someone else controls your livelihood, Dara. She would tell me, her eyes reflecting the orange glow of sunset. Money is not just currency, it is freedom. Guard it carefully. When I was 16, instead of buying me the car I desperately wanted for my birthday, Grandma Mary gave me stocks in 3 different companies and a book on investment strategies. I was disappointed at first, but that gift sparked something in me. I became fascinated by finance, spending hours reading about market trends and investment opportunities. After high school, I attended Northwestern University on a partial scholarship majoring in finance. College was not easy. I juggled classes with 2 part-time jobs, one at the campus library during weekdays and another waiting tables on weekends. My social life suffered, but I was focused on my future. While my roommates spent their money on clothes and parties, I saved every extra dollar, investing small amounts when I could. I graduated with honors and minimal student debt, landing an entry-level position at a prestigious financial consulting firm in downtown Chicago. The work was demanding, with 80-hour weeks and a cutthroat environment. I watched colleagues burn out around me, but I persevered, absorbing everything I could about the industry. After 4 years of learning the ropes and building a client base, I made a bold decision at 26. I left the security of my job to start my own financial consulting business. My parents thought I was crazy. My former boss laughed when I gave my notice. But Grandma Mary sent me a card that simply said, "The oak tree grows from the acorn that dared to fall." The first year of running my own business was brutal. I worked from a tiny apartment, converted my living room into an office, and ate ramen noodles more often than I care to admit. I lost clients to bigger firms and made mistakes that cost me dearly. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. But slowly things began to change. My dedication to my clients started paying off. I focused on helping women like my grandmother build financial security and word spread. By year 2, I had to hire an assistant. By year 3, I moved into a real office space. And by year 5, my company was managing millions in assets with a team of 6 employees. My approach was different from other financial consultants. I took time to educate my clients, empowering them to understand their investments rather than keeping them dependent on my advice. This strategy built incredible loyalty. My client retention rate was nearly perfect, and my reputation in Chicago financial circles grew stronger each year. During those years of building my business, my personal life took a back seat. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious developed. I was too consumed with work and honestly too protective of what I was building to let someone else in. When I was 31, Grandma Mary passed away at 87. Her death hit me harder than anything I had ever experienced. She had been my mentor, my cheerleader, and my moral compass. The summer cottage became mine, along with a modest portfolio of investments and some family heirlooms that held tremendous sentimental value. The cottage alone was worth over $1 million given its prime lakefront location, but to me it was priceless because of the memories it held. At her funeral, I made a silent promise to honor her legacy by preserving what she had built and passing on her wisdom. I renovated the cottage, keeping its charming character while updating the essentials. I spent every other weekend there, finding peace in the same views that had comforted Grandma Mary for decades. By 34, I had built a personal fortune worth several $1 million. My company was thriving. My investment portfolio was diverse and healthy, and I owned both a downtown condo in Chicago and the lakefront cottage in Michigan. I traveled when I wanted, donated to causes I believed in, and enjoyed the freedom my grandmother had always encouraged me to seek. I was content with my independent life. I had close friends, a fulfilling career, and enough money to never worry about my future. I was not looking for a relationship, much less marriage. I believed that if love happened, it would be with someone who respected my independence and shared my values. Little did I know that the universe had other plans, ones that would test everything my grandmother had taught me about protecting myself and my assets. I met Lucas Crawford at a real estate investment seminar in downtown Chicago during a rainy April evening. I almost skipped the event, exhausted from a long day of client meetings, but decided to go at the last minute because the speaker was a well-respected property developer I had been wanting to hear from. Lucas sat next to me, arriving just as the presentation began. He apologized for nearly spilling coffee on my notepad as he settled in, and I was immediately struck by his appearance. He was tall, with dark brown hair, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that seemed both confident and kind. His tailored suit suggested success without being flashy, and when he spoke, his deep voice carried a slight Southern accent that stood out in Chicago. During the question and answer session, Lucas asked insightful questions about market trends and investment strategies that impressed me. His knowledge of financial matters was evident, and I found myself nodding along with his points. When the seminar ended, he turned to me and introduced himself properly. "Lucas Crawford," he said, extending his hand. "Judging by your notes, you know your way around an investment portfolio." We ended up talking for over an hour at a nearby coffee shop, discussing everything from real estate opportunities to our favorite economic theorists. It was refreshing to have a conversation with someone who understood my work and seemed genuinely interested in my perspective. He mentioned he had recently moved to Chicago from Atlanta to expand his consulting business, which focused on helping small businesses optimize their operations. What stood out most was how attentively Lucas listened. In my experience, successful men often dominated conversations, eager to impress with their knowledge and achievements. But Lucas asked questions and truly seemed to value my answers. He was impressed by my company, rather than intimidated by it, calling my client education approach brilliant and revolutionary. Our coffee meeting turned into dinner the following week, which led to more dates. Each time we met, Lucas revealed new layers that drew me in further. He shared stories about growing up with a single mother who worked multiple jobs to support him, how he put himself through college, and his passion for helping other entrepreneurs succeed. His struggle and subsequent success mirrored my own in many ways. The romance progressed quickly but did not feel rushed. Lucas was attentive without being overwhelming. He sent thoughtful gifts like a first edition of my favorite finance book and a handcrafted bracelet from a local artist, not the generic flowers and chocolates I had received from previous suitors. He remembered small details from our conversations and incorporated them into our dates, showing a level of consideration I had rarely experienced. 3 months after we met, Lucas took me to the Art Institute of Chicago, where we spent hours wandering through the exhibits. As we stood before Monet's Water Lilies, my favorite painting, he wrapped his arm around my waist and whispered, "I have never met anyone like you, Dara. You are brilliant, compassionate, and stronger than anyone I know. You make me want to be better." His words touched something deep within me. For years I had been the strong, independent woman who did not need anyone. But standing there with Lucas, I realized that choosing to let someone in did not have to mean giving up my strength or independence. Our relationship deepened over the following months. We took weekend trips to my grandmother's cottage, where Lucas listened to my stories about her with genuine interest. He never complained about my work schedule, and even brought dinner to my office during late nights. When I introduced him to my parents, they were charmed by his respectful manner and obvious affection for me. During long evenings on the cottage porch, we discussed our values and dreams for the future. Lucas talked about wanting to create a foundation to help underprivileged kids access financial education. I shared my desire to expand my company nationally while maintaining its personal touch. Our visions seemed complementary, our goals aligned. 10 months after we met during a private dinner at the cottage, Lucas got down on one knee and proposed with a vintage sapphire ring that reminded him of my eyes, he said. "You are the partner I have been waiting for," he told me, voice thick with emotion. "I want to build a life with you, support your dreams, and face whatever comes our way together." I said yes, without hesitation. The logical, cautious businesswoman in me was overridden by the woman who had fallen deeply in love with this man who seemed to understand and appreciate all aspects of me. We planned a small, intimate wedding at the cottage with just 30 guests, including my closest friends and family. I walked down a makeshift aisle on the beach, with the September sun setting over Lake Michigan just as Grandma Mary and I had watched so many times together. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with personal vows we had written ourselves. Lucas promised to respect my independence, support my ambitions, and cherish the trust I had placed in him. I vowed to be his partner in all things, to share my life and heart fully, and to build our future together with love and respect as our foundation. As we exchanged rings, I felt a sense of completion I had never expected to find. My life had been full before Lucas, but now it seemed richer, warmer, with new possibilities opening before us. I believed I had found a true partner, someone who valued me for exactly who I was. The reception lasted until midnight, with dancing under string lights on the beach and toasts that made us laugh and cry. When everyone had gone, Lucas and I stood at the water's edge, looking out at the moonlight reflecting on the lake. "Thank you for choosing me," he whispered, holding me close. "I promise you will never regret it." I had no reason to doubt him. Everything about our relationship felt right, from our shared values to our complementary strengths. I had built my business on my ability to read people and situations, and every instinct told me that Lucas was genuine. We moved into my Chicago condo, keeping the cottage as our weekend retreat. The first months of marriage were blissful. We established routines that honored both our individual needs and our life together. Lucas continued to be supportive and loving, often surprising me with small gestures that showed his thoughtfulness. I introduced Lucas to my business partners and clients, many of whom commented on how perfect we seemed together. He attended company events and charmed everyone he met. Several clients even hired him as a consultant for their businesses, impressed by his knowledge and approach. Looking back, I can see now that everything was perfect, too perfect. But at the time, I was simply happy, grateful to have found someone who seemed to understand that loving me meant loving my independence too. I had no idea that the foundation of trust we had built was about to be systematically destroyed, or that the man I had married was not at all who he appeared to be. The first 6 months of our marriage were everything I had hoped for. Lucas and I settled into a comfortable routine, balancing our work lives with quality time together. He continued his consulting business while I ran my financial firm, and we would share stories from our day over dinner, offering each other advice and support. The first subtle shift happened around our 6-month anniversary. Lucas brought up the idea of combining our finances into joint accounts over a celebratory dinner at Chicago Cut Steakhouse. "It would make things so much easier," he said, swirling his red wine. "We are married now. Should not we be operating as a true partnership?" The question seemed reasonable enough, but something about his tone made me hesitate. My grandmother had always emphasized maintaining financial independence even in marriage. "I am comfortable with our current arrangement," I replied carefully. "We both have our business accounts separate, and our personal spending account together for household expenses seems to be working well." Lucas's smile tightened slightly. "I just thought it might be simpler. But if you are not ready, I understand." He dropped the subject for the moment, but it came up again the following week, and then again after that. Each time his arguments became more persuasive, focusing on trust and unity in marriage. "Do not you trust me, Dara?" he asked during one discussion, his blue eyes clouded with what appeared to be hurt. "After everything we have shared, you still want to keep your money separate from mine." I found myself on the defensive, trying to explain that my hesitation was not about trust, but about the financial principles I had always lived by. Lucas would eventually nod and change the subject, but a new tension lingered in the air between us. Around the 8-month mark, Lucas began suggesting investments for my company funds, recommending properties and business ventures that his connections had insider information about. When I researched these opportunities, they often appeared questionable, with unclear ownership structures or inflated projections. "These do not align with my investment strategy," I explained, after turning down the third such suggestion. "My clients trust me with their financial futures. I cannot put their money into ventures I have not thoroughly vetted." "You are being too cautious," Lucas said, an edge to his voice. I had never heard before. This is why women often hit a ceiling in finance. They are not willing to take the necessary risks. His comment stung, not just because of its sexist undertone, but because he had never spoken to me that way before. The man who had praised my business acumen was now dismissing my professional judgment. The most concerning change came when Lucas began showing interest in my grandmother's estate. He started asking detailed questions about the cottage property, its exact value, and the terms of my inheritance. At first I thought he was just being thorough about our assets, but his persistence became uncomfortable. "Have you considered adding my name to the deed?" he asked one Sunday morning as we had coffee on the cottage porch. "It would make things easier for tax purposes." "The cottage is part of my family legacy," I replied. "Grandma Mary specifically left it to me in her will. I would prefer to keep it in my name." Lucas's expression darkened. "So, after all this time, you still do not consider me family?" The conversation devolved into our first major argument, with Lucas accusing me of not being fully committed to our marriage and me feeling increasingly cornered. We eventually reached an uneasy truce, but something had fundamentally changed between us. After that, I noticed Lucas becoming distant when I spoke about my grandmother or the sentimental value of her belongings. He would roll his eyes or change the subject when I mentioned renovations I wanted to make to honor her vision for the property. "It is just a house, Dara," he said dismissively during one such conversation. "A valuable asset that is sitting there mostly empty. We could sell it and invest the money in something that would actually grow." I was shocked by his callousness. The cottage was never just a house to me, and he knew that. It was as if the man who had listened so attentively to my stories about Grandma Mary had been replaced by someone who saw her legacy only in terms of dollar signs. One evening, I came home early from work to find Lucas in my home office rifling through my filing cabinet. He claimed he was looking for our insurance documents, but the drawer he was searching contained property deeds and investment portfolios. "The insurance papers are in the kitchen drawer," I said, watching his face carefully. "They always have been." "Right," he mumbled, closing the cabinet quickly. "I forgot." That night, I lay awake beside him, replaying the moment in my mind. The Lucas I thought I knew would never go through my private documents without asking, what else might he be doing when I was not around? The pressure continued to build around financial decisions. Lucas began criticizing my spending habits, despite the fact that I had always been financially responsible. He questioned business expenses, client entertainment costs, even donations to charities I had supported for years. Then came the investment opportunity that became the breaking point. Lucas's friend Roland had a real estate development project that needed immediate capital. Lucas pushed hard for me to invest, not just our personal funds, but my company's investment pool as well. "Roland has done this a dozen times," Lucas insisted. "It is guaranteed to triple our money in 18 months. When I asked for business plans, financial projections, and proof of Roland's previous successes, Lucas became agitated. "Why do you need all that? Do not you trust my judgment? Roland is waiting for an answer, now, not after weeks of your excessive due diligence." I stood my ground, refusing to invest without proper documentation. Lucas stormed out, returning hours later with a cold demeanor that lasted for days. During this tense period, I received a call from my assistant saying that someone had called the office asking detailed questions about my company's portfolio and client list, claiming to be my husband and financial partner. When I confronted Lucas, he dismissed it as a misunderstanding. "Your assistant probably confused me with someone else," he said with a shrug. "Why would I need to call your office when I can just ask you?" His explanation was plausible, but something did not add up. The seeds of doubt were firmly planted, and I found myself watching Lucas more carefully, noting the inconsistencies in his stories and the changing nature of his behavior toward me. The man who had once supported my independence now seemed threatened by it. The partner who had valued my financial acumen now questioned my every decision. The husband who had promised to cherish my family legacy now treated it as a commodity to be leveraged. I began to wonder if I had ever really known Lucas at all, or if the man I married had been carefully crafted to be exactly what I wanted. The thought kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling while Lucas slept soundly beside me, unaware that the foundation of our marriage was crumbling beneath us. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office. My assistant transferred the call, saying the woman had refused to give her name, but insisted it was urgent and personal. "Is this Dara Crawford?" a female voice asked when I picked up. "Yes. Who is this?" "Someone who wishes they had received a warning call before marrying Lucas." Her voice was steady but tinged with bitterness. "My name is Allison Myers. I was Lucas's second wife." My heart seemed to stop. Second wife Lucas had told me he had never been married before. I think you must be mistaken, I said, trying to keep my voice even. My husband has never been married. Allison's laugh was harsh. That is what he tells everyone. Let me guess, he presented himself, as a self-made businessman who understands and supports your independence. He probably proposed with a vintage ring that had some special meaning. My blood ran cold as she described details that matched my experience precisely. Lucas has a pattern, Mrs. Crawford. He finds successful women, makes them fall in love with him, marries them, and then systematically works to gain control of their assets before divorcing them and taking half of everything. She went on to tell me that she had been a successful restaurant owner in Atlanta when she met Lucas. After their divorce, she lost her business and most of her savings. She had only recently discovered I was his newest wife through a mutual acquaintance in Chicago's business community. I am not asking you to believe me, Allison said before hanging up. Just look into his past. The truth is there if you are willing to see it. I sat at my desk for nearly an hour after the call ended, unable to focus on work, my mind racing. Could it be true? Had I married a con man, the Lucas? I knew could not be capable of such calculated deception. And yet the recent changes in his behavior made terrible sense in light of Allison's claims. That evening I told Lucas I had a client dinner and would be home late. Instead, I met with Daniel Harlow, a private investigator who had helped vet potential business partners in the past. I shared Allison's call and my concerns, feeling ridiculous and paranoid as I did so. It is probably nothing, I said, but I need to know for sure. Daniel did not judge. He took notes, asked practical questions, and promised to be discreet. Better to confirm your husband is who he says he is than to wonder, he said reassuringly. For the next 2 weeks I lived a double life, pretending everything was normal with Lucas while waiting anxiously for Daniel's findings. Lucas seemed oblivious, continuing his push for joint accounts and adding his name to my properties. When Daniel finally called requesting an urgent meeting, the grim tone of his voice told me everything before I even saw the evidence. We met at a quiet cafe far from my office or home, where he slid a thick folder across the table. Lucas Crawford was born, Lucas Pritchard Daniel began. He has been married twice before, not including you. His first wife was Margaret Lansing, a surgeon from Seattle. They were married for 3 years. His second was Allison Myers, the restaurant owner who called you. That marriage lasted 2 years. He showed me marriage certificates, divorce decrees, and court documents from both cases. In each instance, Lucas had walked away with substantial settlements despite prenuptial agreements that should have protected his wife's assets. He uses legal loopholes and emotional manipulation, Daniel explained. He convinces his wives to make concessions during the divorce, usually by threatening to drag out proceedings or reveal damaging personal information. The folder contained more. Lucas had been investigated for fraud in Atlanta, but charges were dropped when the complainant suddenly withdrew their claim. His consulting business was largely a front, with minimal actual clients or revenue. Most disturbing was evidence that he had been planning our marriage's end from the beginning. Daniel had uncovered communications between Lucas and a divorce attorney dating back to 2 weeks before our wedding. The messages discussed strategies for maximizing claims against my assets, particularly the cottage property. There is more, Daniel said quietly, pulling out bank statements showing regular transfers from our joint household account to a private account in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were small enough that I had not noticed them missing, but over time they added up to over $50,000. I left the meeting in a daze, the folder heavy in my hands, and heavier still in my heart. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage had been a lie. The man I loved, the future I had planned, none of it was real. That night I waited until after dinner, when Lucas and I were sitting in the living room. He was reading on his tablet while I pretended to work on my laptop, my mind rehearsing what I needed to say. "Lucas," I finally said, closing my computer, "we need to talk." He looked up, his expression open and innocent. "About what, honey?" "About Allison Myers and Margaret Lansing." His face changed so quickly it was startling. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a calculating coldness I had glimpsed only in fragments before. "Who have you been talking to?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "It does not matter. What matters is that you lied to me. About everything. Your past, your business, your intentions for our marriage." I opened the folder and began laying out documents one by one on the coffee table between us. Marriage certificates, divorce papers, bank statements. With each document, Lucas's expression hardened further. "You had me investigated," he asked incredulously. "What happened to trust in a marriage?" "Trust requires honesty," I replied, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. "You have been lying since the day we met. You never intended this marriage to last. It was always about my money, wasn't it? My company, my properties, my grandmother's estate." Lucas stared at me for a long moment, then something seemed to shift in him. The pretense fell away completely, and I saw the real Lucas for the first time. He laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "You really think you are so special, so different from the others. You are all the same, you successful women with your independence and your pride. So easy to flatter, so desperate to believe a man can love you for your mind rather than your money." His words cut deep, but I refused to show it. "I want you out of my house tonight. My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow." Half Lucas said, standing up. "I get half of everything under Illinois law. Half your company, half your investments, half of dear Grandma Mary's precious cottage." He spat the last words with such venom that I flinched. "You should have signed those papers when I asked. Now I will take it all legally, and there is nothing you can do about it." "We will see about that," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Lucas's face contorted with rage. He swept his arm across the coffee table, sending the documents and my laptop crashing to the floor. "You think you are so smart. You have no idea who you are dealing with. When I am done with you, you will be left with nothing but regrets." He stormed around the apartment, grabbing keys and his wallet. Before leaving, he turned back, his handsome face ugly with anger. "Prepare for war, Dara. You may have built your fortune, but I will be the one who enjoys it." The door slammed behind him with such force that a framed photo fell from the wall and shattered. I stared at the broken glass, a perfect metaphor for my marriage, and finally allowed the tears to come. Not tears of sadness or regret, but of rage and determination. Lucas had underestimated me. He thought I would crumble, that my emotional attachment to him would cloud my judgment. He did not understand that the same strength and resolve that had built my business would now be directed at protecting it from him. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and called Lisa Roberts, the best divorce attorney in Chicago. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "And we don't have much time." Lisa Roberts agreed to meet me at her office first thing the next morning, despite it being a Saturday. I arrived early, having barely slept, with the folder of evidence tucked under my arm and dark circles under my eyes that even concealer could not hide. Lisa's office occupied the entire top floor of a downtown building with views of Lake Michigan. The space projected exactly the image she cultivated, powerful yet approachable, with modern furnishings in warm tones and walls adorned with her credentials and photos of Lisa with prominent clients. "Let me see what we are working with," she said after hearing my abbreviated version of events. Her expression remained neutral as she methodically reviewed Daniel's findings, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. "Lucas has done this before," I said, watching her face for a reaction. "Twice. He got significant settlements from both previous wives." Lisa nodded without looking up. "I am familiar with this type of case. Men or women who strategically marry for financial gain are more common than you might think, especially among high net worth individuals." She closed the folder and fixed me with a steady gaze. "The good news is you discovered this early. The bad news is that without a prenuptial agreement, Illinois law typically favors an equal division of marital assets." My stomach dropped. Even though we have been married less than a year, even though he deliberately deceived me? Unfortunately, yes. However, she continued, leaning forward, "We have several angles to explore. First, we need to find his previous wives and get their formal statements. Second, we need to secure all your financial records and document any unusual activity since your marriage. And third, we need to review your grandmother's will very carefully." Over the next several days, I threw myself into building our case. I gathered years of financial records, documented the growth of my business before meeting Lucas, and compiled evidence of his attempts to access my accounts without permission. Lisa arranged conference calls with both Allison and Margaret Lucas's previous wives. Hearing their stories was like listening to versions of my own experience. Lucas had presented himself slightly differently to each woman, tailoring his persona to match what they were looking for. But the pattern was identical. Charm, whirlwind romance marriage, followed by increasing control and financial manipulation. "He cleaned me out," Margaret said, her voice still bitter, 8 years later. "My practice, my savings, even my retirement accounts. The legal fees alone nearly bankrupted me." Allison's experience had been similar. He had copies of keys made to my restaurant accessed financial records without my knowledge. By the time I realized what was happening, he had gathered enough information to threaten my business licenses with fabricated health violations if I fought him in the divorce. Both women agreed to provide sworn statements and testify if necessary. Their willingness to relive painful memories to help a stranger touched me deeply, creating a bond of sisterhood forged through shared betrayal. Meanwhile, Lisa's associate, a forensic accountant named Trevor, traced the money Lucas had been siphoning from our joint account. The Cayman Islands account was just the beginning. Lucas had a complex network of offshore holdings and shell companies designed to hide assets and minimize tax liability. "He is good," Trevor admitted during one meeting. "But he is not as clever as he thinks. There is always a paper trail if you know where to look." As we built our legal strategy, I remembered something my grandmother had mentioned years ago. Something about a special clause in her will. I had been so devastated by her death that many details of the inheritance process had blurred together. I asked Lisa to obtain the complete probate records for my grandmother's estate. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after Lucas moved out. Lisa called me to her office for an emergency meeting, her voice unusually animated. "We found it," she said. The moment I walked in holding up a document with several passages highlighted, "Your grandmother was one very smart woman." She handed me the document pointing to a specific clause in Mary's will. As I read it, tears filled my eyes, partly from grief at missing her wisdom, partly from relief at her foresight. The Michigan lakefront property at 1427 Shoreline Drive is bequeathed to my granddaughter, Dara Elizabeth Miller, with the explicit condition that ownership remains solely in her name and lineage. This property shall not be considered marital property in the event of any marriage or divorce, nor shall any spouse have claim to it, regardless of state law provisions. Any attempt to claim, transfer, or encumber this property, contrary to these terms, will result in immediate transfer of ownership to the Lakeside Women's Shelter Foundation. She protected it, I whispered, running my finger over my grandmother's name on the signature line. She knew this could happen. Not just the cottage, Lisa said, flipping to another page. Read this. A similar clause applied to all the investments and heirlooms my grandmother had left me. She had created what amounted to a post-mortem trust protecting her legacy from precisely the situation I now faced. This changes everything, Lisa explained. Lucas can still go after assets you acquired during the marriage and try for a portion of your business since it grew while you were married. But the cottage, the investments from your grandmother, all of that, is legally untouchable. That evening, I drove to the cottage alone, needing to feel close to Grandma Mary. Standing on the same porch where Lucas had proposed, I felt her presence more strongly than I had since her death. You tried to warn me, I said to the sunset, the same view we had shared countless times. With all your talks about financial independence and protecting myself, I should have listened better. The next day, Lisa called with more news. One of Lucas's previous business partners had come forward after being contacted by our investigator. Jason Reeves had records of fraudulent activities Lucas had conducted years ago, using falsified documents to secure investments for non-existent projects. He was afraid to come forward before Lisa explained. Lucas had threatened his family, but now with the possibility of multiple victims joining forces, he is willing to testify. We also discovered Lucas had been preparing divorce papers with his attorney since before our 6-month anniversary, strategizing how to maximize his claims against my assets. The document included detailed plans to use my emotional attachment to the cottage as leverage to get me to concede on other matters. He never loved me. I realized during one late-night strategy session with Lisa. Not for a single moment. This is not about love, Lisa replied gently. This is about power and greed. Do not take it personally, even though I know that is impossible advice to follow. As our court date approached, we prepared a comprehensive packet of evidence for the judge, including sworn statements from both previous wives, documentation of Lucas's hidden financial network, evidence of his fraudulent business practices, the specific clauses in my grandmother's will, timeline, showing Lucas's pattern of targeting wealthy women, records of his premarital communications with divorce attorneys. The night before the hearing, I sat alone in my condo staring at the special envelope Lisa had prepared for the judge. It contained the most damning evidence against Lucas, organized chronologically to show the calculated nature of his deception. We should not need this, Lisa had said. But if Lucas tries anything unexpected, this is our insurance policy. I ran my fingers over the sealed envelope, thinking about the journey that had brought me here, from the confident businesswoman who thought she had found true partnership to the betrayed wife, fighting to protect her legacy. The pain was still raw, but something else had emerged alongside it, a steely resolve that reminded me of Grandma Mary. You did not raise me to be a victim, I whispered to her memory, and I will not become one now. I placed the envelope in my briefcase and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would determine not just the fate of my assets, but also my ability to trust again. The Cook County Courthouse was intimidating by design, with its towering marble columns and echoing hallways. I arrived early with Lisa, both of us dressed in conservative suits that projected competence and calm, though my heart was racing beneath my silk blouse. We were directed to courtroom 307, where Judge William Harrington would hear our case. Lisa had been pleased when we received our assignment, telling me that Judge Harrington was known for his thoroughness and lack of patience for manipulative tactics. "He will see through Lucas, if anyone can," she had assured me. We settled at our table, arranging our documents with practiced efficiency. Lisa looked completely in her element, but I felt exposed and vulnerable. Despite all our preparation, I knew that court proceedings were unpredictable, and Lucas had proven himself to be dangerously resourceful. At precisely 9:30, the courtroom doors opened, and Lucas entered with his attorney Richard Blackwell, a man known for handling high-profile divorces with aggressive tactics. Lucas was impeccably dressed in a Navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary paid for with my money, no doubt. Our eyes met briefly across the room. Where I expected to see anger or perhaps anxiety, I saw only smug confidence. He nodded slightly, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips, as if we were acquaintances meeting at a business function rather than adversaries in a divorce proceeding. That calm assurance sent a chill through me. Did he know something we did not? Had we missed some crucial detail in our preparations? "All rise," the bailiff, called as Judge Harrington entered the courtroom. He was an imposing figure, tall with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. After the initial formalities, Blackwell presented their case first. His strategy became immediately apparent, painting Lucas as a devoted husband who had contributed significantly to my business success through his consulting expertise and networking connections. My client provided valuable business insights that directly contributed to the growth of Mrs. Crawford's company during their marriage, Blackwell argued smoothly. Their assets were functionally commingled through their shared life and business collaboration, regardless of whose name appeared on the accounts. Lucas took the stand, delivering a performance so convincing that for a moment even I almost believed him. He spoke of his love for me, his contribution to my business decisions, and his heartbreak when I allegedly became controlling and suspicious without cause. "I just wanted our marriage to be an equal partnership," he said, his voice catching, with seemingly genuine emotion. Dara's success was something I was proud of, something I helped nurture. I never expected her to turn on me this way. Judge Harrington listened without expression, occasionally making notes, but giving no indication of his thoughts. When it was our turn, Lisa methodically dismantled Lucas's narrative. She presented financial records showing that my business had grown consistently before meeting Lucas, with no significant change in trajectory during our marriage. She introduced testimony from my employees stating that Lucas had minimal involvement in company operations. Then came the evidence about Lucas's past, his previous marriages, and the pattern they revealed. Margaret and Allison had both provided video depositions, their testimonies striking in their similarity to my experience. Lucas's facade began to crack as the evidence mounted. I watched him lean over repeatedly to whisper urgently to Blackwell, his composed expression gradually giving way to tension. Blackwell objected, frequently arguing that Lucas's previous relationships were irrelevant to our divorce proceedings. Judge Harrington overruled most objections, his interest visibly piqued by the emerging pattern. The real turning point came when Lisa presented evidence of Lucas's hidden financial activities and his premarital communications with divorce attorneys. "Your Honor, these documents clearly demonstrate that the respondent entered into this marriage with premeditated intent to defraud my client," Lisa argued. "This was never a genuine marriage, but a calculated financial scheme." Judge Harrington frowned, reviewing the documents with increased attention. He asked several pointed questions of Lucas, who struggled to provide consistent answers. During a brief recess, Lisa squeezed my arm reassuringly. "We are doing well. The judge is seeing through him." When court resumed, Blackwell attempted to redirect the narrative focusing on Illinois law regarding marital property division regardless of misconduct. This was their strongest argument, the fact that, legally, Lucas might still be entitled to a significant portion of assets accumulated during our marriage, despite his deception. Your Honor, Blackwell said confidently, while my client regrets that his wife has chosen to portray their relationship in such a negative light, the law is clear. In the state of Illinois, marital property is subject to equitable distribution regardless of alleged misconduct. He then moved to his closing argument, growing bolder with each sentence. Mr. Crawford is entitled to his fair share of all marital assets, including Mrs. Crawford's business growth during their marriage and the valuable lakefront property inherited from her grandmother, which has been their marital home for the duration of their relationship. At the mention of my grandmother's cottage, Lucas actually smiled, looking directly at me as if savoring my reaction. I felt my blood pressure rising, but Lisa's hand on my arm kept me grounded. We had anticipated this. Judge Harrington turned to Lucas. Mr. Crawford, would you like to make any statement before I consider my ruling? Lucas stood straightening his tie. His confidence had returned fully bolstered by Blackwell's legal arguments. Your Honor, he began smoothly, despite the unpleasant accusations made today, I entered this marriage in good faith. I contributed to our shared life and to my wife's business success. Under Illinois law, I am entitled to an equitable division of our marital assets. He paused for effect, then added with unmistakable satisfaction, I am taking half her millions, including her grandmother's estate. A murmur ran through the courtroom at his brazen statement. Several spectators exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by his naked greed. Judge Harrington's expression remained neutral, but I noticed his eyebrows raised slightly. Miss Roberts, does your client wish to respond? This was the moment we had prepared for. I stood feeling surprisingly steady despite the stakes. Yes, Your Honor. I have something I would like to present to the court. I retrieved the sealed envelope from our table and approached the bench. This contains additional documentation regarding my grandmother's estate that directly addresses Mr. Crawford's claims. The judge accepted the envelope, opening it methodically. Inside were certified copies of my grandmother's will with the special clauses highlighted, along with the complete probate records confirming that these provisions had been properly executed and recorded years before I met Lucas. Your Honor, as you can see, my grandmother's will explicitly states that her properties, including the lakefront cottage, cannot be considered marital property under any circumstances I explained. These provisions were legally established long before my marriage and were specifically designed to protect her legacy from this exact situation. Judge Harrington studied the documents, carefully flipping between pages with increasing interest. Occasionally, he glanced up at Lucas, whose confident expression had begun to falter as he realized what was happening. After several minutes of review, something unexpected happened. Judge Harrington's lips twitched, then curled upward. A small chuckle escaped him as he read a particular passage. The chuckle grew into an actual laugh as he looked up at Lucas. Mr. Crawford, the judge said, his voice colored with barely suppressed amusement, are you familiar with the legal concept of a spendthrift provision? Lucas looked to Blackwell in confusion, but his attorney appeared equally perplexed. No, Your Honor, Lucas replied cautiously. It is a fascinating legal tool, Judge Harrington continued, now openly smiling. Mrs. Miller, the deceased grandmother, appears to have been not only wealthy, but extraordinarily prescient. This will contain one of the most comprehensive asset protection clauses I have ever encountered in my 30 years on the bench. He held up one page, addressing the entire courtroom. Not only did Mrs. Miller explicitly exclude her property from consideration as marital assets, but she also included specific language identifying attempts to claim the property through marriage and subsequent divorce as an automatic trigger for forfeiture of any potential interest. The judge turned his attention directly to Lucas. In layman's terms, Mr. Crawford, the very act of attempting to claim this property in divorce proceedings automatically disqualifies you from any consideration. In fact, he continued scanning another page, your specific actions as documented here constitute the exact behavior Mrs. Miller anticipated and protected against. By now, Lucas's face had drained of color. His earlier smugness was replaced by dawning horror as he realized the trap he had walked into. Judge Harrington was not finished. Furthermore, given the substantial evidence of premeditated intent to defraud presented today, I am not inclined to view any of your claims favorably. The judge shuffled the papers, tapping them into a neat stack. Court will recess for 30 minutes while I review these documents more thoroughly and prepare my ruling. As the judge exited the courtroom, the tension broke. Whispers erupted around us as spectators processed what they had witnessed. Lisa leaned close to me, her voice low but triumphant. "Your grandmother," she whispered, "was a legal genius. I have never seen a more bulletproof inheritance protection." Lucas and Blackwell huddled in urgent conference, their body language conveying panic and desperate strategizing. Occasionally, Lucas would glance in my direction, his expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. When court reconvened, Judge Harrington delivered his ruling with decisive clarity. In the matter of Crawford versus Crawford, having reviewed all evidence and testimony, I find the following. First, the lakefront property and all assets inherited from Margaret Mary Miller are excluded from marital property considerations as PER, legally binding provisions in the deceased's will. He paused, looking directly at Lucas. Second, given the clear evidence of fraudulent intent on the part of Lucas Crawford, I am denying his petition for any portion of Dara Crawford's business assets or personal property acquired before or during the marriage. Blackwell began to object, but the judge raised his hand, silencing him. Furthermore, Mr. Crawford will be responsible for all legal fees incurred by Mrs. Crawford in these proceedings. Given the evidence presented regarding Mr. Crawford's pattern of behavior, I am also referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential fraud charges. The gavel came down with finality. This marriage is dissolved effective immediately. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and movement. Lisa turned to me with a broad smile, squeezing my hand in congratulation. "It is over," she said simply, "and you won completely." Across the room, Lucas stood frozen, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Our eyes met one final time, and in that moment I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a profound sense of closure. The man I had loved had never existed. The real Lucas was a stranger to me, and now he would remain so forever. As I gathered my belongings to leave, I thought of my grandmother and felt her presence more strongly than ever. She had protected me not just with her legal foresight, but with the values and strength she had instilled in me throughout my life. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, as I walked out of the courtroom ready to begin the next chapter of my life wiser and more resilient than before. Walking out of that courthouse felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into blinding sunlight. The immediate relief of victory was almost dizzying, but beneath it lay a complex mixture of emotions that would take much longer to process. I remember standing on the courthouse steps, watching Lucas storm off with his attorney, and feeling strangely hollow despite having won everything. Lisa suggested celebrating with champagne, but I declined. This did not feel like a moment for celebration, so much as a somber acknowledgement that one chapter of my life had ended and another uncertain one was beginning. "You should be proud of yourself," Lisa said as we parted. "Most people in your situation would have been devastated, paralyzed. You fought back brilliantly." "I had help," I replied, thinking of my grandmother, of Lisa herself, and even of Lucas's previous wives, who had found the courage to speak up. The first few weeks after the divorce were the hardest. I returned to a condo that still held echoes of Lucas, despite my efforts to remove all traces of him. At night, I would catch myself reaching for him in bed, only to remember that the man I reached for had never really existed. The betrayal felt fresh each time, like reopening a wound just as it started to heal. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into my business with renewed dedication, using the energy that might have fueled anger or grief to instead drive innovation and growth. My clients responded positively to my increased engagement, and the company flourished. But professional success could not fill the personal void. Trust, which had once come naturally to me now, felt like a luxury I could not afford. I declined social invitations, avoided dating apps, and kept even longtime friends at a new distance. The walls I built for protection also kept out connection and joy. 3 months after the divorce, I realized I was not healing, just hiding. The turning point came during a weekend at the cottage. As I sat on the porch watching the sunset, a memory surfaced of my grandmother sitting in that exact spot after my grandfather died. "Grief is not something you get over, Dara," she had told me. "It is something you move through like walking through a river. Fight the current and you will drown. Learn to swim with it, and eventually you will reach the other shore." That night, I cried for the first time since the courthouse. Not brief tears of frustration, but deep cleansing. Sobs that left me exhausted, but somehow lighter. I cried for the love I thought I had found, for the future I had imagined, and for the trust that had been so thoroughly betrayed. The next morning, I made a decision. I would no longer allow Lucas's betrayal to dictate my life. I could not change what had happened, but I could choose how to respond to it. I started with small steps. I joined a support group for survivors of financial abuse, a term I had never associated with myself, but which perfectly described what Lucas had attempted. Listening to others share similar experiences helped me understand that I was not alone, nor was I uniquely foolish for having been deceived. In that group, I met women from all walks of life, some who had lost everything, and others who had managed to protect themselves as I had. We shared not just stories of betrayal, but strategies for recovery, for rebuilding trust in ourselves and eventually in others. Inspired by these connections, I established the Mary Miller Foundation, named after my grandmother, dedicated to providing financial education and legal support to women facing economic abuse or exploitation. I donated the first $1 million myself and worked with Lisa to develop programs specifically addressing the tactics Lucas and others like him employed. The foundation became a central part of my healing journey. Each woman we helped represented a small victory against the manipulation and deceit Lucas had embodied. I began speaking at events, sharing my story publicly, to raise awareness about financial predators who use marriage as their hunting ground. At one such event, I reconnected with Daniel, the private investigator who had uncovered Lucas's deception. He had continued tracking Lucas after our case concluded and shared that my ex-husband had left Chicago, his reputation in financial circles thoroughly destroyed by the court case and subsequent investigations. "He will probably try again somewhere else," Daniel warned. "Men like that rarely change their patterns." But his next target might find the warning signs more easily, I replied, thinking of the educational materials our foundation had begun distributing nationally. As my public advocacy grew, so did my personal connections. I fostered deeper friendships, allowing myself to be vulnerable again, in small, careful ways. I renovated the cottage not to erase memories, but to reclaim the space as fully my own. The master bedroom became a library filled with books my grandmother had loved, and new ones that spoke to my evolving interests. About a year after the divorce, I met James at a financial literacy workshop sponsored by my foundation. Unlike Lucas, he did not try to dazzle me with charm or flattery. He was a widowed high school economics teacher with a genuine passion for educating young people about money management. Our relationship developed, slowly built on honest conversations and shared values rather than whirlwind romance. When he asked about my divorce, I told him everything, watching carefully for his reaction. Instead of empty reassurances that he was different, James asked thoughtful questions about boundaries and expectations, acknowledging that my experience had permanently changed how I approached relationships. "Trust is earned," he said, "not just initially, but continuously. I do not expect you to trust me completely now or maybe ever, but I hope you will give me the chance to be trustworthy." His words reflected a wisdom Lucas had never possessed, an understanding that real love respects rather than exploits vulnerability. 2 years after my divorce, my company had doubled in size. The foundation was helping hundreds of women annually, and I had learned to balance caution with openness in my personal relationships. The pain had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something useful, a heightened awareness that informed rather than limited my choices. I still spent many weekends at the cottage, often inviting friends or foundation beneficiaries to enjoy its peaceful surroundings. On one such weekend, as we gathered on the beach for a bonfire, a woman whose divorce the foundation had recently helped finalize asked me a question that made me pause. "Do you ever regret marrying him? If you could go back, would you change it?" I watched the flames dance against the darkening sky, considering her question carefully. "No," I finally answered. As painful as it was, that experience taught me something my grandmother tried to teach me all along, something I had to learn firsthand. True security comes not from what we possess or who loves us, but from our ability to face loss and betrayal without losing ourselves. I looked around at the circle of women, their faces illuminated by firelight, each with her own story of survival. "What Lucas tried to take from me was not just money or property," I continued. "It was my sense of self, my ability to trust my own judgment. Reclaiming that was far more valuable than anything I might have lost financially." Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood alone at the water's edge, listening to gentle waves lapping against the shore. I thought about the journey from that devastating courtroom revelation to this moment of genuine peace. The woman I was before Lucas would never have created the foundation or connected so deeply with other survivors. She was successful but insulated, independent, but isolated in many ways. Through the pain of betrayal, I had discovered a capacity for empathy and purpose that might otherwise have remained dormant. This was my grandmother's greatest legacy, not the cottage or the investments she had so cleverly protected, but the resilience she had cultivated in me through her example and wisdom. In protecting me from Lucas's greed, she had given me the opportunity to discover my own strength. As I turned to walk back to the cottage, I silently thanked her once more, not just for the material inheritance she had safeguarded, but for the invisible gifts that had proven far more valuable: the ability to begin again, the courage to remain open despite pain, the wisdom to transform betrayal into purpose. The path ahead was not perfect or certain, but it was authentically mine, shaped by both loss and love, failure and triumph. And in that moment, watching the moon's reflection shimmer on Lake Michigan, just as it had throughout my childhood, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when someone tried to take advantage of you? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life journeys of overcoming challenges. Remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance is not money or property, but the wisdom to protect yourself and the strength to rebuild when someone tries to break you. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to protect what matters most to you.